Hello, YouTubers, and welcome to Level-Headed News. This is your host, Brenda. This is the political episode this morning. All these URLs are in the description of the video for your convenience. Articles here to go through. And the first one is off of Breitbart, and it says, to cooperate here a little bit. Attorney General Jeff Sessions seeks resignation of 46 U.S. attorneys. Story I was talking about earlier in my live show that I was doing. I knew that there was a bunch of people who was supposed to get fired. They're giving them the opportunity to resign before they fire them. And waiting for the hamster to roll it on up here on the screen for me. There we go. It's coming up. Slow but sure. Got 3 legs and 1 eye. It says, Attorney General Jeff Sessions is seeking the resignations of 46 United States attorneys who were appointed during the prior presidential administration, the Justice Department said on Friday. Many of the federal prosecutors who were nominated by former President Barack Obama have already left their position, but nearly 4 dozen who stayed on in the first weeks of the Trump administration have been asked to leave in order to ensure a firm transition. Justice Department spokeswoman Sarah Azgur Flores said, until the new U.S. attorneys are confirmed, career prosecutors in our U.S. attorneys' offices continue the great work of the department in investigating, prosecuting, and deterring the most violent offenders, she said in a statement. It is customary, oops, it jumped just a little bit too much. There it goes. It is customary, though not automatic, for the country's 93 U.S. attorneys to leave their positions once a new president is in office. The Obama administration allowed political appointees of President George W. Bush to serve until their replacement had been nominated and confirmed. The federal prosecutors are nominated by the president, generally upon recommendation of a home state senator. One U.S. attorney appointed by Bush, Rod Rosenstein of Maryland, remained on the job for the entire Obama administration and is the current nominee for Deputy Attorney General. U.S. attorneys are responsible for prosecuting federal crimes in the territories they oversee. They report to Justice Department leadership in Washington, and their priorities are expected to be in line with those of the Attorney General. Article off of New York Post. Team Obama's bank settlement cash grab is unconstitutional. One that is in tiny print here and needs to be goosed a little bit. We'll goose it. Well, we'll try to. Come on. Oh, come on, just a little bit more. I think that'll do, yes, because truth and labeling laws are among the laws from which Washington feels exempt. The titles of congressional legislation often with the facts, such as the Patent Protection and Affordable Care Act. The Stop Settlement Slush Funds Act, however, is the ailments for which it is the remedy. The Justice Department, well, the Justice Department has negotiated bank settlement agreements whereby banks make restitution to the government for the damage they allegedly did in the connection with the creation and sale of residential mortgage-backed securities in the subprime mortgage crisis. Our subject here isn't, however, whether the sums extracted from the banks, such as Citigroup, $7 billion, Bank of America, $16.65 billion, JP Morgan, $13 billion, are proportionate to their alleged culpabilities. Rather, it's what justice does with millions of these dollars. banks to meet some of their settlement obligations by directing donations to various non-governmental advocacy organizations that serve democratic constituencies and objectives that were neither parties to the case nor victims of the bank's behaviors. For money owed to the government, money the disposition of which is properly Congress's responsibility. So the donations are, in effect, appropriations of public money. The pesky Constitution, however, says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in the consequence of appropriations made by law. Favor expansions or expensive notions of let me try that again. Mercy. Progressives who favor expansive notions of executive discretion and hence the marginalization of Congress regarding the donations, their anodyne manifestation of inherent presidential discretion in enforcing laws. At a May congressional hearing, 3 constitutional scholars, Georgetown University law professor Nicholas Quinn Rosencrantz, the Heritage Foundation's Paul Larkin, and Boyden Gray, White House counsel to George H.W. Bush, disagreed. Everything government does cost money. The appropriation power, Rosencrantz testified, is Congress check on executive overreach, the ultimate backstop against a willful president. If presidents first money without an appropriation, the careless constitutional separation of powers would be thrown into disequilibrium. President relies on disbursements that circumvent the appropriations clause. The U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia has held that his administration has, enforcing the Affordable Care Act, illegally dispersed billions of dollars to insurance companies without a congressional appropriation. Larkin reminds Congress give the president credit card or cash box that he can use to purchase goods and services or disperse appropriations as he sees fit. Identifies precisely who may receive federal funds. With the donations, justice rewards congressional groups without any direction from Congress or judicial oversight. It is, Larkin said, a federal offense for a government officer to spend money in excess of the sum that Congress has appropriated. Donations represent executive lawlessness known at the state level. Chris Christie, his office for the District of New Jersey, he negotiated a non-prosecution agreement with Bristol Myers Squibb. The company agreed, among other things, to make a $5 million gift to Seton Hall University's law school in order to avoid prosecution for securities fraud. Woodrow Wilson, former New Jersey governor and progressive president, was the first president to criticize the American funding. He was particularly hostile to the separation of powers, which he considered an anachronistic to executive efficiency. The bank settlement donations are another step nullifying the appropriations clause, 16 words, which butte the separation of powers. In the end, Gray testified, every other constitutional power runs into the appropriations power. This is why presidents have consistently endeavored to seize the appropriations power from Congress. The Constitution was just 20 years old when, in 1809, Congress felt the need to enact legislation designed to prevent the president from using appropriated funds from one object to another. Subsequent presidents have obligated funds in excess of appropriations, thereby forcing Congress to choose between appropriating the funds country's credit. Congress often has been complicit in diminution, as when it empowered the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to commandeer funding from the Federal Reserve System based on or base motives. Let's try that again. Base motives of self uh, aggrandizement impelled many presidents to disregard the separation of powers. Progressive presidents do this as a matter of principle, which is worse. Mercy, that was a rough read on that one. I'll have to put some words in that one because there's a bunch of them in there that I couldn't pronounce, let alone know what the hell they mean. You're sitting there scratching your head saying, what the hell did you say? I don't know. The next one we have here is off of InfoWars, and it says China warns of nuclear first strike in response to THAAD deployment. China warns that reconsidering its policy not to use nuclear weapons against South Korea in response to U.S. deployment system and sending B-52 bombers to protect its ally. THAAD is being deployed to from North Korean ballistic missiles after several tests by the Stalinist state in recent months. It's furious because the system will also be capable of detecting and tracking missiles launched from China. It was also reported yesterday that the U.S. will send B-1 and B-52 nuclear bombers to South Korea in order to display a stern show of strength. South Korean troops and 15,000 U.S. personnel have also started their annual Full Eagle military exercise. USS Carl Vinson nuke carrier will join the drill, carrying dozens of fighter jets. In Global Times, which is widely regarded as the voice of the Chinese government, says that Beijing will respond to America's strategic provocations by rapid increase in the number and quality of China's strategic nuclear weapons. It isn't worried about starting a limited arms race, asserting that the U.S. must pay the price for the THAAD. The piece goes on to warn that if the U.S. further intensifies its anti-missile attempts containment, China may reconsider its pledge of not being the first to use nuclear weapons. In other words, Beijing is signaling that it would be prepared to use nuclear weapons against South Korea in the event of a conflict. Related development, China's second aircraft carrier is moving closer to completion, while China vows to use its first-class Navy to intercept any intruding aircraft of control. Last month, Beijing warned the Trump administration that the People's Liberation Army is making preparations for war after the deployment of the nuclear-powered USS to patrol the South China Sea. Meanwhile, columnist Pat Buchanan warns that a new Korean missile crisis could be on the horizon. North Korean, try that again, new test by North Korea of missiles or atom bombs for an ICBM could bring U.S. strikes on its nuclear facilities and missile sites, igniting an attack on the South, he writes, adding that China would then be forced to defend its ally. Is off of Breitbart, and it says, Dem rep introduces bill to block Trump from using federal funds to pay for border wall. And get it to scroll up. Representative Gwen Moore, Democrat, there we go. Gwen Moore, Democrat, Wisconsin, is slated to introduce legislation Thursday that would block President Trump from using federal funding to pay for a wall along the Mexican border. I'm not in favor of the wall, but if there is a wall, then I do not want the United States of America to pay for the wall, Moore told CBS News, saying that American taxpayers should not be burdened by Trump's campaign promise. The legislation, No Taxpayer Funding for the Wall Act, which would prohibit any federal funding, including funding already set aside for that purpose, from going to the wall. The bill has reportedly already gained the support of 36 Democrats, hoping to gain the support from Republicans who are worried about the cost of the border wall. My bill gives amazing opportunities, I think, to people like Jim Jordan out of building the wall, she said, referring to the Republican lawmaker from Ohio. I'm trying to mobilize some interest in my bill from other Democrats have scrutinized Trump's plan to build a border wall, especially over its potential cost. Claire McCaskill, a Democrat of Missouri, sent a letter to the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, asking the agency, the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, on how it plans to pay for the border wall by March the 13th. I request that DHS provide a briefing for the committee regarding DHS acquisition process and funding for this requirement, McCaskill wrote in a letter to Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly, also asking for a formal estimate of the wall's cost. The administration is considering a plan that would cut funding to the Coast Guard, the Transportation Security Administration, and the Federal Emergency Management Agency in order to pay for the border wall and other methods of immigration enforcement, the Washington Post reported. Was the end of that article. The next article I have for you is also off of Breitbart. It says Attorney General Jeff Sessions reforming Obama's lax policy on crimes and drug trafficking. Get it to scroll up. And it's coming. Slow but sure. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has begun a comprehensive reform of former President Barack Obama's lax policies towards rising crime and is directing federal prosecutors to use every legal tool they have from communities. Unfortunately, the most recent crime data available shows a 10.8% in murders. Oops, hamster got out of control. Shows a 10.8% in murders in this country, while federal prosecutions for violent crimes have been declining, Sessions wrote in a memo to all federal prosecutors Wednesday. And he continues by saying, policy of the Department of Justice to reduce crime in America and addressing violent crimes must be a special priority. With crime rates rising, this is not an easy task, as all professionals know, but we do have a strong evidence that the aggressive federal laws can be effective in combating crime. Our department's experience over decades show these prosecutions can help save lives. Sessions' reference murder is drawn from FBI's 2015 report revealed a 10.8% increase in murders from 2014 to 2015, the largest increase in a single year since 1971, and a 3.9% increase in violent crime overall. Major cities were hit with a staggering 21.6% increase in murders, another FBI report found. Under Obama, a sudden reversal of decades-long decline in violent crime took place in 2015 after he pushed his stigmatized and federalized campaign against the state and local policies following the August 14th riots in Ferguson, Missouri. Sessions has now directed the 94 federal U.S. attorney offices to work with state and local law enforcement to specifically identify the criminals responsible for significant violent crime in their districts and ensure they are prosecuted. Sessions specifically cited drug trafficking as a major contributor to violent crime. Prosecutors to take down dealers and their enterprises. Many violent crimes are driven by drug trafficking and drug trafficking organizations. For this reason, disrupting and dismantling those drug organizations through prosecution under Controlled Substance Act can drive violent crime down, he said. The memo also indicates Sessions will demand prosecutors seek mandatory minimum sentences, Politico reports. Sessions' approach is a complete U-turn from the Obama administration's efforts to minimize penalties against drug traffickers. For example, Obama launched an unprecedented effort to slash drug traffickers' sentences, many of whom are armed convicts. He commuted over 1,700 federal prisoners' sentences before leaving office, saying it was the right thing to do, and we all make mistakes. Sentencing guidelines, the Obama administration also released 30,000 convicts from federal prisons. In 2013, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder told prosecutors not to mention the weight of drugs seized from traffickers or filling crime reports. The purpose was to avoid triggering strong sentences. The soft approach was bad news for communities, but good news for traffickers eager to get back into drug dealing business. Recidivism rates for those charged with drug crimes stand at 77%, according to the Justice Department study commissioned under Holder. While the media uses the term drug offenders to paint a sympathetic picture of dealers, there are almost no cases of simple possession in federal courts. As Sessions explained during a May press conference, nearly all of the 99.5% rated in federal prison on drug-related charges were found guilty of trafficking. Drug trafficking is inherently violent enterprise, inseparable from violent victimization and the ravages of addiction. Only 47,000 people died from drug overdose deaths in 2014 alone. Heroin overdose deaths have more than tripled between 2010 and 2015. Immigration also fueled this surge of death by despair. Nearly all the heroin used in the U.S. is brought across the border by illegal alien traffickers. By consistently identifying the leading violent offenders in our communities and employing all available tools to hold them accountable, we will combat violent crime, Sessions added. The Obama administration efforts to slash prison population is directly linked to massive heroin-linked death toll, according to one federal prosecutor. And there is a link if you want to read Sessions' memo. You can click on that and read the memo. The next article is also off of Breitbart. Just scroll up here a little bit. Tear gas attack on Hamburg Metro affects 50. Needs to scroll up a little more. Unknown attackers launch a tear gas attack on a train in Hamburg that reports say has injured at least 6 and affected 50 people and led to massive police presence in Hamburg train station. At 6:55 p.m. on Friday evening, passengers on a train in Hamburg on the S-Bahn line subjected to tear gas attack by 2 young men, including 3-year-old girl. Paramedics and police arrived on the scene to treat the passengers of the train for various ailments, including respiratory injured. German paper Bild reports. The attack occurred just before the train reached Sternesau's station, Hamburg, and upon arriving, all passengers fled into the station to escape the gas. And there's some pictures in this if you want to pull them up and take a look at them. It says federal police at the train station said that the perpetrators were likely 2 young men who had Rudiger Karstens, Spokesman for the federal police said. The recordings of the surveillance camera were secured. The investigations continue. Hamburg Airport had to be partially evacuated as a result of similar attack. In that attack, an unknown toxin was released through the airport's ventilation system, and it led to 68 people needing treatment for irritated eyes and breathing difficulties. The Hamburg metro system also saw an attack on a woman earlier this year when a Moroccan migrant pushed her onto train tracks of the subway. The 34-year-old woman was pushed by the 16-year-old and was knocked out due to a fall from the platform. Before the attack, CCTV footage revealed the 16-year-old's attempt to rob the woman. The attack also follows a 24-hour period which has seen an axe attack on a train and at the main railway station in Dusseldorf, and a machete attack that injured an 80-year-old man in Dusseldorf earlier on Friday. And there's a correction in this. It says, due to a translation error, the original version of this article said 50 people were injured. In fact, 50 people were on the train, in fact, 50 people on the train were affected, and at least 6 people were known to have been injured so far. So there's that. The next article, it says Trump's biggest tech supporter election showed the tide is going out on globalization. The one that needs a little bit of spiking up, make it a little bit bigger here. Hang on. Sometimes I just can't hit the right buttons. Button. Who's got the button? Investor Peter Thiel, who summed up for President Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention, has remained close to the president, believes the era of globalization is over. Showed just how unhappy people are with globalization, he said. I'm naturally inclined to think of it in those terms, Thiel said. There's something around globalization that's not been working that well. Thiel's comments came Tuesday night, week, by IHS Market conference in Houston. The movement of people and goods is becoming more difficult through immigration and trade restrictions, said Thiel. Western Europe and other places are tightening regulations, creating headwinds for global banks and other and tech companies, he added. The designed to survive a nuclear war, but even so, I think there are a lot of regulatory challenges that Silicon Valley will be facing from Western Europe and elsewhere, he said. People in Silicon Valley are complacent about the march toward global expansion, he said. There's a determination story. You can tell where this is the future, and China will eventually under and cave eventually. All of these things, he says. But then you might wonder, maybe this doesn't happen to all, and maybe it's possible for the internet to actually fragment and not to have this historical necessity to it. That mind organization with the word global in its title today, he said. That's so 2005 dated, he said, to illustrate the point. He took aim at the annual Davos World Economic Forum. A decade ago, this was a group of people who were running the world, he says, and now it's just a group of people who messed up the world. Shout out to CNBC's Jim Cramer, quoting him as saying, there's always a bull market somewhere. You just need to find it. Thiel is beginning to agree with the colleague on this thesis. We're now in a bull market in politics, he said. I'm not sure this is a good thing, said Thiel, but It's a fact that maybe politics is becoming more important than becoming more intense. Or it's becoming more intense. That makes more sense. The range of outcomes is becoming greater, and that we're in a world in which there's a bull market in politics that's getting started. The next article I have is off of BizPac Review. I'm losing my voice here tonight. President Trump's plan is poised to put Marines 20 miles from ISIS capital. U.S. Marines arrived in Syria Wednesday to begin the first phase of President Donald Trump's plan to expel from its capital of Raqqa, in the Washington Post reports. The Marines will provide artillery support to the Syrian Democratic Forces and accompanying U.S. special operations in the assault on the city. The type of artillery base must be within 20 miles of its intended target to be effective, the Post notes. Some infantry Marines accompanied the unit to provide force protection on the mission. Trump, along with Secretary of Defense James Mattis, will also likely lift the current cap on U.S. special operations embedded within local forces in tandem with the deployment. The U.S. has approximately 500 special operators in the country currently. Their proposal would also include the use of U.S. attack helicopters, U.S. artillery, and increased arms sales to U.S.-backed forces. The main recipient of U.S. aid and artillery support will likely be the Syrian Democratic Forces, an anti-ISIS force largely composed of Syrian Kurdish fighters. American reliance on Syrian Kurds will likely spark major tensions between the U.S. and Turkey, who regard the Kurdish forces as an existential threat on par with ISIS. The Kurdish forces have proven the only reliable large-scale U.S.-backed force capable of fighting the terrorist group effectively. New strategic plans for Raqqa are likely just a small facet of new overall strategy to eradicate ISIS. A review of U.S. strategy along with options to increase operations tempo, which delivered to the White House Monday. This plan is a political military plan, Chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff told a think tank audience in late February. The grievance of the Syrian civil war have to be addressed. The safety and humanitarian assistance that need to be provided to people have to be addressed, and the multiple divergent stakeholders' views. Next article that I have is off of BizPac Review. DC bar owner sued Trump because his hotel competition is unfair to be live activists. The owner of the Washington, D.C. establishment, Cork Wine Bar, are suing President Donald Trump and New Trump International Hotel, alleging that Trump is unfairly hurting their business. Cork Wine Bar offers 200 international wines to its customers, but now the owners Khalid Pitts and Diane Goss, with the help of pro bono lawyers, are seeking to prevent the operation of Trump's DC hotel while Trump remains in control of it. Interestingly, the major players behind the suit are Democratic political activists and donors. According to FEC data, Khalid Pitts is a Clinton donor and contributed $500 to her election effort in 2015 while he worked for the Sierra Club. Both Pitts and Gross have been active in liberal political causes. Pitts also served as a campaign director for the Service Employees International Union. Gross is a former civil rights lawyer. Now they're suing Trump, and one of their pro bono attorneys includes Alan B. Morrison, co-founder of the Public Citizen Litigation Group in 1972 with Ralph Nader. In 2016, Morrison donated $200 to the Democratic National Committee and $100 to the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. Other attorneys include George Washington University Law School professor Stephen L. Schooner, Scott H. Rome, and Mark S. Zaid. Schooner donated $1,250 to help former President Barack Obama get elected in 2008. From 2007 to 2014, Zaid has donated $3,290 to Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee in Maryland. We have events we do here for elected officials, nonprofits, foreign dignitaries, the World Bank, law firms, Gross said. Those folks are now being courted to come and want to go there because they see it as advantageous to them to curry favor with the president. Neither Pitts nor Gross named any particular clients they've lost, but around inauguration, the two said that business was nothing like what it had been during the inauguration in 2009. We do lose bookings sometimes, and nobody ever gives you a reason. They don't say, we're going to the Trump Hotel instead of coming here. We do not know that business has been, we do know that business has been a little slower with the inauguration of this president, Gross said. Pitts and Gross want Trump to either resign as president or fully divest himself and his family of their interest in the hotel, since his public appearance at the hotel and comments made by White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer are unfairly taking customers away from Cork Wine Bar. This next one is off of BizPac Review. Trends the internet when he can't take any more of Socialist Sanders' blatant hypocrisy. Sanders is still doing his thing, and by his thing, I mean engaging in class warfare for political purposes. Bernie puts out a tweet that says, let's be clear, America is not broke. The very wealthy and huge profitable corporations just aren't paying their taxes. Fox Business Network's Charles Payne was having none of Sanders' nonsense and was quick to point out his hypocrisy on Twitter. Payne tweets, America is so wealthy some folks have 3 houses. And that attracted some immediate attention. Dan Bogno tweets, this tweet wins the internet. And there's a bunch of other tweets here. Charles Payne says, America's folks have 3 houses. And Puffin tweets, yep, including this one on Lake Champlain, aerial photo of this fancy estate of Sanders. Says, another one says, like Bernie Sanders does, wish he would redistribute some of his wealth. Yeah, Bernie clearly isn't a math major. John Stossel writes in Forbes, if the IRS grabbed 100% of income over $1 million, the take would be just $616 billion. That's only a third of this year's deficit. Our national debt would continue to explode. And it does go beyond even that, because if the rich didn't have any money, you can imagine how many other people would lose their jobs as a result. The government's one-time grab would have a ripple effect that would literally destroy the economy. But then again, that's probably what Marxists like Sanders would love to see, as long as he is taken care of course. It's off BizPac Review. It's the final one. Aren't you glad? Probably sick of hearing me today. Sheriff Clark just heard where Black Lives Matter was headed, and he's not the only one with a lot of questions. Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark slammed Black Lives Matter for not having its priorities straight. Clark said he's baffled that Black Lives Matter is protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota when they should be in Chicago protesting the city's record black homicide rates. Black Lives Matter is in North Dakota protesting Dakota Access Pipeline, Clark tweeted. What the hell are they doing there? Should be in Chicago. Sheriff Clark added, blacks in the ghetto want better schools, jobs, and safer neighborhoods. Green is the new black. Black Lives Matter has been forced to sell the left's environmental agenda to stay relevant with the Democratic Party. Say Clark's Twitter followers agreed. What does the pipeline have to do with Black Lives Matter? What a joke. One person tweeted. Another replied, nothing. They go where their boss pays them to go. Clark and numerous Twitter users suggested that BLM is merely protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline because they're being paid to as operatives of leftist groups bankrolled by billionaire George Soros. Soros gave $246 million to 100 anti-Trump groups behind this week's Day Without a Woman protest, according to the Research Center. Soros is also reportedly financing many of the anti-Trump riots around the country. And there's a list of tweets here. Up and take a look at those. The article says, many say they hope Black Lives Matter won't pollute the Dakota Access Pipeline campsite the way the environmental protesters did. Environmental activists protest the DAPL, claiming oil pipelines would harm the environment. When protesters departed, they left behind mountains of trash and abandoned puppies and freeze to death. So there you have everything that I had in the file today. If you like what I'm doing here, give it a thumbs up, share it on your social media so everybody gets to enjoy the news. Subscribe yet, please do. That way you'll stay informed. Have a great day.